Welcome to video 3 of 4 in the 3 types of email for WordPress series. In this one, we're going to take a look at transactional email, which is basically one-way outgoing email, if you remember from the last couple of videos. Let's take a look at the iPad screen here. Last time we talked about the 3 types of email, and we first went into send and receive email, which, as you remember, is just regular back and forth email that you might be familiar with in your regular life. But for business, if you have a website, a business that has a website, you'll want to send emails to users of that website at times after they either click a button to submit a contact form or make a purchase and receive a receipt from the website. These are transactional emails because they are from a computer to a human, and they are transactional in that there was an action that took place, potentially a transaction like a sale or something like that. There's 3 examples that I might cite that are very common as far as what would trigger a transactional email. The first is a contact form. And if you look at my website here at gregdavis.com, on my contact page, I have a contact form that takes the first name, the email address, the message, and then a submit button. And that's the action that makes the triggered transactional email go out. And so as far as when someone fills out a form here and they click this message, I will receive a notification as the administrator of the website, and I've set that up with my Forms plugin at my website here. And we'll talk about how I've set that up. The other 2 is examples of a time when transactional email commonly gets sent out is for a forgotten password link. You know, if you're trying to log into your website and you forget the password, there's often a forgotten password link there on the login page that will trigger an email that goes out to reset your password. And so you want those emails to be able to go out as a transactional email. Thirdly, like I mentioned, there might be an email going out as a receipt or a notification or both when a transaction, as far as with a web store or an e-commerce store, as far as a receipt or a notification of a sale or both. There might be more than one email that goes out when a transaction has been made. And so let's go back to the iPad, and as far as send and receive, this is the stuff that we went over in the last video. But let's skip down to transactional email, and I'll just reiterate that it's outgoing only. And because it's outgoing only, that transactional email goes to a person over here who receives that email. But for the website itself, the emails that get sent don't actually need to be stored there at your website, and so you don't need email hosting. You just need the ability to send an email out. And if you look at an example like this, you know, you've got the website here, and there might be a contact form, there might be an e-commerce checkout happening, but some kind of a transaction. So the trigger for that transaction could be the submit button right here, whether it's to buy a product or to submit the contact form. And at that point, potentially 2 emails might get triggered. An email to notify the administrator and an email to notify the user or the person that clicked that. So what happens is that first the server receives the data. You know, it receives the act that submit button was hit. The server receives the data, and then whatever form plugin you have and your outgoing transactional email provider, that does step number 2. So that sends an email to the user to say, hey, you submitted this stuff, and here's a copy of what you submitted. Or if it's a receipt for a purchase, it might be some information about that purchase, a download link, or some shipping information, something like that. And then a third activity that may happen is that a second email goes out to the administrator of the website. And so if we go back to this is kind of the first example of how this might be set up by default. So this is kind of a default, basic website setup for transactional email. If I use the green color as we use it for transactional email, by default, it might be a web form, it might be an e-commerce checkout. But if this is the website here, what happens is, WordPress is set up by default to use a system called PHP SendMail. And you may know that WordPress is made using the PHP language, and it does have a default email setup for sending email. Depending on how your server is set up, your server may support that default setup. And so as far as a default on basically a basic shared email or website host, the outgoing email would be potentially the admin notification and the user notification or the receipt. And you've got to define a from address. And so in this default, let's just, before we go on to the next type or preferred type of transactional email setup, let's talk about choosing a from address. Now, each email sent must have a from address, and it's usually a from address or a reply to address. And oftentimes you might see an address that looks something like no reply at the domain name or do not reply at the domain name. And that's basically to tell the user, hey, this is just an automated email, a transactional email that we've sent to you, and there's no one monitoring this email address, and so you can't just hit reply and send an answer or a question back to that email address. And that might be a preferred way of doing business for your transactional emails. However, some businesses with a business website want to use a functional email like info at your domain name or customer service at your domain name. And in that case, for example, info at, if the from address at this email that the person receives, this person receives an email here. It's a readable email, and if it's going to them, of course, that's traditional hosted email for them. So I'll color that in blue. But if they want to be able to, if you want to have the ability for those users to reply, for those users to reply back, then that from address needs to be a valid address. And so you might use an address like info at yourbusinessname.com. And so when someone replies to that address, you could host that email. If you have an info at address where you do want to be able to receive emails at that email address, then you would need hosting, right? And that would be kind of that traditional send and receive email again at the info. Or if you don't necessarily want to receive that and you want a human being at the business that actually has an email address to be able to receive email, but you may not want this address to be a publicly known address, what you can do is use a system called email forwarding. And depending on your host and your email hosting, you can just forward emails from an address like info and have them forward to, the actual address that's a hosted email address, which might be someone's name, like Jim at your business name. You could also just choose Jim as the forwarding address, and of course that would then be public knowledge because the receiver of the transactional email, this user notification, they would see the Jim email address and be able to reply to it if they want to. And so those are a variety of ways that you can set up the from address when you're sending transactional email to your users. Now, without the intermediary here, which is what we're really going to talk about, setting up transactional email in a way that is the best practice for WordPress sites and for websites in general, we use a program called SMTP, or Outgoing Email. Now, SMTP, you'll see that acronym when you're talking about setting up email systems for your websites. It stands for Simple Mail Transfer Protocol. So it's just what we use for outgoing. And you may have seen when you set up your send and receive email in your email program like Outlook, you may have seen where you set your SMTP settings there. So that's just what that means. It's a protocol for sending email from and to computers and people. And so the second way, and the better way of sending and receiving, or just sending, I should say, transactional email, is that the website, again, it might have a web form, it might have an e-commerce site that needs to send receipts, but the website, as we know, has an IP address. And when you use a separate email service, an SMTP email provider or a transactional email service, one of the best benefits you're getting is you're using a different IP address for sending emails than your website had. And what that means is that email sent from this SMTP or transactional email provider has a different IP address, and those providers of transactional email services use and protect their IP addresses, and they're used for email only. They also add that your domain that you use for sending that email is verified, and so it's an authenticated type of email sending where the deliverability is better. You don't want to have an IP address like in this above example. If your web form has a certain IP and it sends these receipts out here, and you happen to get like a spam report from a user, they're going to report your website's IP address, and that has a risk of having your website be flagged for sending spam, even if it was accidental. But you can totally prevent that if you use a transactional email service. It's just for sending out email, same type of thing, but instead of sending direct from the website to the receivers, it first routes the email through an SMTP provider or a transactional email provider, which uses a separate IP address. It's for email only, and it uses a verified domain. And so there are services that we basically connect together. We choose one of each with our WordPress websites here. We choose a transactional email provider, some of which are free, some have a free level, some cost a little bit, and some cost more. And these are all examples of transactional email providers that you could use. SendGrid has a free level, and that's a good way to set up, and I'll show you how to set that up and where to find that. And SparkPost also has a free level. They really tout both of those as testing for development, and they give you these two give you 100 emails a month. And that's a good amount for a small website or even just testing it out. Now, if you use Amazon's simple email service, it's a little bit harder or more complex to set up, but you can get email allowable numbers to more like 50,000 emails a day. 14 emails per second are allowed. In my example that I'll show you. These other services have a variety. These Mailgun and Mandrill are more advanced, and they cost a little bit more. And then MailerLite and Postmark are very popular transactional email providers that are a little less expensive. And they provide you a verification through the DNS records, which we've learned earlier in this series. So like I said, we choose one. If we choose one from this side, well, how do we connect that to our WordPress website? Well, what we use is right here. On our website, we use an SMTP plugin for outgoing emails. And there's 3 that come highly recommended right now. There's actually 4 that I'm going to show you here, and I'll show you 2 out of the 4 in my examples. But Post SMTP is a long-term SMTP plugin that's been around. Used to be called Postman, and it was taken over by someone and renamed Post SMTP, and it works with most of the transactional email providers. And that's what I've used quite a lot. WP Forms SMTP is another free plugin that works very, very well. Fluent SMTP is a little bit newer. Fluent also has a Forms plugin, but their SMTP plugin is quite excellent, so I'd recommend looking at Fluent SMTP. And then finally, for Amazon in particular, the WP Offload SES plugin, and the light version is a free one. They also have a paid version, but the light version works quite well for Amazon SES. And for Amazon, Fluent SMTP also works without a separate add-on. And like I said, SMTP stands for Simple Mail Transfer Protocol, and it's just the way that mail is sent when it's outgoing email. And so let's take a look at a couple of the services and their differences. First of all, let's look at a simple website. At my create.com example that we've seen before, humanhandwriting.com, this is just a default WordPress installation where I just have everything set up in the cPanel by itself, just by default. If I look in the dashboard here at the WordPress website, I'm logged in as the administrator, and I've gone to plugins and add new. I went over here, and if you just do a search for SMTP, the top three out of 4 that I've mentioned come up here first, and these are the most popular SMTP plugins. Post SMTP is the one you can see it says active up here in the right. It's already installed and activated on this website. But here's the WP Mail SMTP by WP Forms, and here's the Fluent SMTP plugin. There's also quite a few others that work and are very popular as well. But I've activated this Post SMTP plugin, and if you look here, down here under Post SMTP, I can look at the settings, and one of the things that is advantageous for using one of these plugins is that it keeps an email log. It'll show you and keep a record of what emails have been sent out, and so it's a good way to troubleshoot if emails aren't going out for some reason. But within here, they have a wizard that will take you through some steps to set up your SMTP provider and connect it to your website. And they don't have the Amazon SES extension yet, although it looks like they're building one. But I would recommend using Post SMTP for either using the free Gmail or another SMTP provider. And I should go back quickly here and just mention that, along with these SMTP outgoing transactional email providers, you can use the free Gmail, and that just means that this is kind of the first step, and I'll show you how to set that up. But if you use Gmail as your transactional email provider, you are getting the advantage of using a separate IP address, for sending email. But remember, I talked about using the from address here. You aren't able, when you're using Gmail as your transactional email provider, you aren't able to use an email address from your own domain name, but instead you have to use an email at gmail.com. And so, an address at gmail.com is not as reputable, or it's not as it's not as good as an email address as something at yourdomain.com. So it's not quite as professional, but it's easy to set Gmail up as a free transactional email provider. Let's go back up here and let's go back to the website. And what I've done is I just installed this Post SMTP plugin as an email log, and I do not have it configured. You can see right here, Postman's not configured, and it's mimicking out-of-the-box WordPress email delivery. So even though this plugin is activated, I do not have it activated yet. In fact, if I look at the settings of this plugin, you could see that the type is default. I'm not using SMTP. I'm just using the default WordPress built-in PHP mailer. And so I'll go back to the settings here, and you can see that so in this configuration, Postman sends via sendmail or PHP mail, not the SMTP protocol. It's also using the port number 25, which has no authentication. It's basically a port designed for plain text, and it's not as secure as sending via SMTP, where your email is encrypted on the way. And so if it were intercepted, then it couldn't be read. Whereas if you use the regular with no authentication, an email, if it is intercepted on the way, it can be read because it's just in the plain text type. So if I were to say, make a test email and send, so if I go to send a test email, I've done this. I've sent a test email to my own email address, and I've received the email, and I right-clicked on the email and I clicked View Source. So I'll just show you guys what that looks like. Let's see if I go to here. This is the source of the email. Let's see, is this the one? Yeah, this is the source of the email. And when you go and look at the source of an email, there's a lot of header information and things like that. But if you look for authentication results, you can see a little deeper about with what's going on. So my hosting does provide me with an SPF record. And so that's one method of verification, and that's good. It is sending with an SPF verification in the background from my host. But it does not have the second type of authentication which you would want, which is called a DKIM. It says none. And so if I look at a different type of authentication email, if I click this one, this is now a different email where I had it sent from my website at gregdavis.com, where I have the Amazon SES service set up, a transactional email provider. Look at authentication results here. I have SPF also, and that's been verified. My domain is verified with Amazon. And there is also a DKIM authentication in place. It says pass instead of none. And you could see that the header includes AmazonSES.com. And so that is a better and a more encrypted way of sending email, and a more reputable IP address to send from instead of just from the website itself. And so we set up these transactional email authentications through the DNS records. So I have DNS records right here. That is where the transactional email provider will give you instructions on how to change your DNS records so that you can verify. So this is for authentication and verification. So you verify your domain name because you're the only one that should have permission to access the DNS records. And then those companies can look and say, okay, they've authenticated and we can verify this domain name. And let's just look at the different types of setups. There's 4 types of setups, and 3 of them I'd recommend using. And this first one I would not. And that's why I used a red X in the box over here with the first one. So this is, like I indicated before, this is the first type where you're just using PHP SendMail, the default way of sending email. And by looking at the source, we could see that there was an SPF record, but there was also not the second DKIM type of record authentication there. And the biggest problem is that you're using the same IP address to send mail as your website, as well as not being able to track email, and it's just not as deliverable. And so you could risk damaging your website host's reputation by sending this way. And so if we go to the second type of setting up transactional email, so if you use an SMTP plugin to set up a transactional email provider, and then what you do is use the Gmail free service, you are using a different IP, you are using authentication of your domain name for sending, but the from address is a Gmail address, and it makes it free and easy. But like I said, it's just not as professional as using something like, your name at yourbusinessname.com. I just use example.com in this case. But so it's not quite as good as using an email like this. But it's a simple and easy setup. But let's look at number 3. For an example, using the SendGrid free service, it has a couple of limitations, and I guess I'd call these cons. 100 emails a day is your limit, and so SendGrid, they assign the free level, and they define that kind of as a developer testing level, and so they give you 100 a day. SparkPost does the same thing. But if you have an e-commerce site that's getting more than, say, 50 orders in a day, for each order, the transactional emails you might want to set up to go out might be, a receipt for the user as well as a notification for the website owner or the administrator. And so if you get more than 50 orders in a day, that's 100 emails that are going out. And so that's one con to it. The other one is that SendGrid Free is super popular, and so the IP address, that is associated with the free level at SendGrid has had some issues in the past. And so as far as the IP address that they use, it's good that it's a different IP address than the website is. But because the SendGrid free level is used by so many people, that IP address sometimes is compromised. And I've had it where when I'm using the SendGrid free level, sometimes emails don't go out. And so that's kind of a negative as far as deliverability. But it does have some positive things with it. It uses a different IP from the website, of course. There's authentication in place. And unlike the Gmail example up here, the SendGrid free or SparkPost free is another one. You are able to use your name, your business domain. Your name at example.com is a big advantage. But like I said, the free level has its limitations and its risks, with the IP address being taken advantage sometimes because it is free. Let's look at number 4. The best way. Now, you don't have to use Amazon SES. If you use another type of paid transactional email service, you'll get high limits and you'll get a really protected IP address. And there is a cost associated with it. So if you use a service which charges monthly, for example, SendGrid, or if you use, let's go back up to these. One of the high-level premium, a SparkPost paid, SendGrid paid, Amazon paid, Mailgun and Mandrill are more expensive, or either one of the paid accounts from MailerLite or Postmark. With any of those, you're going to be in this boat here. This one down here. I really like Amazon SES, and I'll show you how mine is set up. But basically, the advantage is you have a protected different IP. You have high levels of authentication for the SPF records, DKIM records. You have your own domain name that's been verified. Now, one of the things that's true about Amazon's simple email service, that's what the SES stands for, simple email service, there is no free plan. And so there's an almost free plan, though, and every plan, the Amazon SES plan, is almost free. There are no monthly plans here, and the cost is per email. However, it's very low cost and it has high limits. You have to apply for it, and it's not hard to get approval, but you want an existing website that an actual human at Amazon can look at and say, okay, this is a real person. We're not seeing that they're going to be sending, any spam or anything like that. And so we'll go ahead and approve. Let's take a look at my website again. Now at gregdavis.com, if you find my contact form, you'll see that I have You can use the contact form below, to contact me. You can put your first name, I want your email address, a message, and then you click submit. And what happens then is inside of my website here, now I've gone to plugins, add new, and over here I typed WP Offload SES. And so that's a great plugin by the great company Delicious Brains. And the SES Lite plugin is free. You can see that I have it active and installed here on the website. And so under Dashboard and Offload SES Lite, you can see that I have it set up. I have settings here where I have it on, send email using SES. Now, similar to the other website back here, if I turn this off, it'll just use traditional WordPress sending. But I have a list of my verified senders inside of Amazon. You can send a test email, and that's where you saw me look at the code for that test email here. Or from the form when I filled out the form as an example here. That was where that was from. But if you look at my website settings here, there are AWS access keys that are needed. And you could see that what I've had to do is I've had to get my access keys from Amazon and then place them in my config file in my WordPress files, my WordPress settings. And mine's defined in here already. Just takes a little bit more setup, but it's very, very secure. And so here in Amazon, if you go to AWS, it's aws.amazon.com. If you don't have an account, you can get a free account and you sign into the console. But if you look at, I clicked pricing here under Amazon SES, under products, you can see that there's a lot of different AWS or Amazon Web Services products. And you can just do a search really for SES. But down here, you can see where if you're sending an email, sending emails down here so you can send 62,000 emails a month for free if you're hosting your website at an Amazon server. But I'm not doing that, and I'm hosting my website at GridPane on another VPS or virtual private server there. And so I'm charged per email. But if you look at my pricing here, I'm charged 10 cents for every 1,000 emails. And I'm not charged once I get to 1,000. I'm charged for single emails. So if you look at examples down here, let's see if we configure. If I send, say I send 100 emails out in a month's time, those limits that we had before on the free services, that would cost me 1 cent US dollars. And so I can use this account for multiple websites and have a really high deliverability service for very, very cheap. So if I end up, sending between all my website clients 1,000 messages in a month, that's going to be 10 cents. I mean, I can send 10,000 messages for just $1. And the limits that I have, if you look at my SES account here, I'm now logged in, and I went under services. I have it here favorited, but it's under business applications and Amazon Simple Email Service, so you can just use this search window to find it. I went into SES home, and then I clicked domains, and then I clicked the domain that we're thinking of here. And you can see that it's enabled for sending. I have verification, which is a text record that I had to put in my DNS, and then Amazon goes and looks at it. I also have DKIM set, and it's enabled, and my domain has been verified. So this is what I had to do here was make 3 other DNS records called CNAME records, put them in here, and then Amazon went and saw, okay, you've done that, and they matched the keys we gave you. And so that domain name, the gregdavis.com domain name, is verified, and I am able to send from that. So I am approved to send 50,000 emails per day at a rate of up to 14 emails per second, which is so overkill. It's plenty for sending transactional emails out with Amazon SES. And so Let me just show you where, since I have the tab open here, as far as SendGrid, sendgrid.com/pricing, the email API plans, there's free service that is allowed 100 emails a day, and then Essentials basically starts at $15 a month. For $15 in, in SES at Amazon, gosh, for $15, I could send, I think, 150,000 emails. That would cost me 15. So anyway, Amazon SES takes a little bit more setup, and you do have to apply, and it takes a few days for them to get back to you. But once you're there, you have the ability to send a lot of emails and get them very professionally sent through a transactional email system. And so back to the iPad here, the best way to set up transactional email is with a professional service that costs something. It doesn't have to cost very much. But what you've got with Amazon SES is a very low cost, different IP, authentication, and email at your custom domain name. And so that is a good overview about how transactional email is set up and the best ways to do it. I hope you enjoyed that video, and I'm sure that I'll come and make more of these with more specific instructions for some of the other services that you can use. And feel free to comment below and hit subscribe and hit like if you don't mind. That helps a lot. And if you have any questions about the setup, feel free to go to leveragewp.co and ask a question in the comments, or use the comments here in YouTube. And we'll see you next time. Thanks, guys.